Hello, friends. We are back with episode 116 of our weekly highlights. And unfortunately, we were not on the airways last week because apparently I thought I had navigated the treacherous waters of not getting sick after conferences, but it just was a delayed reaction, I guess. So I was out of commission last week, but I'm back hopefully with a normal voice this week. But of course, helping me along the way is my awesome co-host Mike Thomas. Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Eric. Glad that you are feeling better this week, and we can get back to it and hope for continued health going forward.
Absolutely. We're getting that season for those of you that have little ones at school. Spring breaks are happening. So we got time off and making sure we can get some downtime. And the last thing I want is downtime on the bed hacking away. But luckily, I'm able to get some rest. And yeah, we got a lot to talk about here in this terrific issue that was curated by longtime Our Weekly curator member, Rio Nakagawara. Awesome issue as always, and he had tremendous help from our fellow Our Weekly team members and all members like you around the world contributing to the Our Weekly project. If you haven't noticed, there has been a bit of additional buzz around potentially having what I might call a lean R installation that's mostly depending on what we call the base R installation, i.e., when you install R, this is what comes out of the box, as they say. Why has this been in the spotlight a bit more? Well, we touched on it in the last episode, but changes afoot with the advent of WebR, the awesome innovation from the team at Posit about running R inside your web browser in a self-contained way. Well, what we found out in that episode, definitely have a listen to it if you haven't already, is that while it's very quick to get a base R installation up and running, whenever you have to install a new package, there is a bit of wait time associated with that. So there has been some, curiosity out in our social media circles about what are ways that we can leverage base R to our advantage to hopefully make this an even faster, getting up and running with WebR or frankly of any R environment. And that's where our first highlight comes from Luis Apiolaza, hopefully I got that right, who is the associate professor at University of Canterbury, who puts a nice little spotlight in his first of a series of blog posts, giving a little love to base R functionality. Now, base R itself has a lot going on, right? I mean, there's a reason it's one of the leading, statistical computing packages in data science. But with the recent perspectives that we've seen in the last few years around, especially those new to R, leveraging the tidyverse for a lot of data processing and data manipulation, what Luis has done in this post is put a very nice emphasis on a base R function that's been there for a long time that definitely needs some more attention with how you can be efficient with your data processing. And the real nugget in this post is the within function. I am a bit ashamed to say that after using R all these years, I didn't know this function existed. So kudos already to Luis for putting the spotlight on this for an old timer like me who thought I knew most of everything in base R. But if you've not seen within function before, the idea is that you put in as the argument the data frame that you want to operate on. This should sound kind of familiar. And then within the rest of the function, you could have a simple or perhaps a multi-line expression where you can operate on the namespace of that data frame that you supply in. This just starts sounding really familiar if you've dealt with the tidyverse because you can transfer your knowledge of using, say, the mutate function from dplyr into a call for within to derive additional variables or change existing variables in your data frame and also be able to reference, say, new variables downstream in that same expression, much like you can in mutate, where you can create a variable and then use that same new variable in another mutate call or within that same mutate call. It is really efficient. And I am very impressed to see this because I only knew about some of the basics with a function called with, which is a more general version of this. but within really accomplishes a lot of that data manipulation piece that maybe you might be missing if you were just on your base R install and hadn't installed the tidyverse yet. Now, this is just the first in a series of posts. So the R Weekly issue that we have, of course, linked in the show notes, has some additional posts from Luis on his additional exploration about some you might call hidden gems in base R. But this is going to be, I think, becoming a lot more focused, especially with the talk of WebR and finding the best ways of using these. And frankly, another great use case is if you have a constrained environment where maybe for whatever reason your IT group doesn't want you installing additional packages that are outside of the base R installation without a lot of extra overhead. It's always nice to see just how far you can go. And maybe it's first in what I might call a modern take on using these functions where, you know, to be honest, sometimes the internal documentation for these base functions were written a long time ago. So maybe they're not quite as, I don't want to get in hot water here, but you get my drift. But in any event, it's great to have these modern takes on it. And I'm really curious to see what other nuggets that Luis and others in the community are going to uncover for us.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that the base R functions don't have nice, pretty package down sites, maybe like we have for some of the newer packages out there. But I would say do not feel bad, Eric, because I didn't know about Within either. I always did all my base R data prep work with the trusty old dollar sign.
Oh, yeah.
And I am pretty impressed by how much the within function lends itself to a tidy syntax. In just about every dplyr pipeline I write, though, I'm doing some sort of group by, which wasn't in this particular blog post. And I know that there are a couple of ways to do this in base R through the subset, aggregate, and there's even a by function. But I think that can be where the syntax really starts to deviate from what we have in the tidyverse. But it is interesting. It'd be an interesting exercise to check out the dplyr source code, I feel like, and see if they utilize any of these base R data transformation functions, or if it's pretty much all written in C++ at this point. Is that where we're at?
That's what I've been understanding since the early days is they try to use C++ for a lot of speed. So that might be the case here. Yep.
Gotcha. And then I had heard, but not used very, very much, about a function called transform, which is another base R function, which looks a lot like within in terms of the syntax that you would write. But I guess one of the main differences there is that you cannot use a variable that you created earlier on within your statement, in a calculation for a later variable that you're trying to create or transform, the way that we can do that within a dplyr mutate statement, create one variable and then use that variable in the next variable that we're creating, if you will. So you can't do that with transform, but you can do that with the within function, which is pretty interesting. So it looks like there's a follow-up post by Luis called Love for Base R Part 2 that touches on filtering data using the with and subset base R functions. So if you're interested in that, definitely check it out. And knowing, I guess, that the dplyr code at this point has really been implemented in C++, I guess I'd be curious to see if there's any difference in speed between these base R functions and the dplyr equivalents, especially as you get to larger and larger data sets.
Yeah, that's a great thing to investigate in the future. And yeah, as we said, we got in our weekly issue a link to that second post. And yeah, the ones I have used in the past, boy, I was a subset fiend, if you will. I was using subset for all my filtering needs many, many, many years. So that was that function. I know it's not a part of this particular post, but that was my first exposure into the idea of this non-standard evaluation, or in quoting syntax, because you could feed in the name of a variable in a data frame without the quotes around it when you do subset. And that seemed like magic to me. But yeah, there's lots of little aha moments along the way. So, but I think we're seeing, like I said, renewed interest in just how far we can take these installations because, yeah, that WebR thing, that ain't going away. So we're going to be seeing the best use cases for this down the road.
Yeah, and I think something that we talk about a lot is just to have all sorts of different tools in your toolbox, right?
Yep.
Because you'll be working on different use cases on different days. So I think it never hurts to know how to do some data prep work in dplyr and then know how to do some of this data prep work similarly in base R. So I think it's always good to have lots of options in your back pocket. I've run into use cases before where I'm developing an R package and I'm using one function from dplyr just on one line, and that's sort of ridiculous to import a whole entire package just for one particular line of code. So I go and figure out whatever the base R equivalent is of that, so that I can reduce the dependency on that package. So like I said, depending on the use case, I think it's always good to have lots of options in your back pocket.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself, Mike. And that's actually a great transition to speaking of having options. Well, we all know what's been in the news lately, and we touch on it on this very podcast and previous episodes, is the use of large language models via tools like ChatGPT and recently GPT-4 from OpenAI. I liken to a quote I think I've heard in the past that context is everything. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, like I said, with this buzz of using these LLMs or large language models, we're starting to see many organizations and multiple industries starting to figure out what are the best use cases and strategies for leveraging these models. But it often comes down to just how can these organizations leverage their vast amount of existing internal data sources or other supplements that are outside the scope of what perhaps the models that are being surfaced by ChatGPT are using behind the scenes, which of course are under the control of OpenAI. What can we do to perhaps augment what is in those models with some additional context that might be tailored to the questions that we have for a specific domain? And that's exactly the kind of issue that James Wade, research scientist at Dow, has explored with another awesome blog post that accompanies his R package called gpttools that we have talked about in a previous R Weekly highlight, about how with a recent new capability in ChatGPT of augmenting the existing functionality with third-party plugins or third-party integrations. Is there a way we can do that in R in a similar way? Well, sure enough, this blog post has a very interesting use case of how we might be able to put additional context into the models that are being surfaced here. So the idea here is leveraging a concept called vector databases. Now, this term was new to me, so I did some reading up on it. But at a high level, it's the idea when you have these textual representations of, say, a textbook that you scraped or obtained or any other corpus of text, that you can assign some kind of score or technically a floating point to a series of these tokens that are generated from this source of text, so that additional algorithms, such as in machine learning for text mining and also in deep learning, can leverage these scores to find relationships or find the best, most appropriate results for a particular query. And we have linked in the supplements of the show notes to a nice little blog post that gives you a good primer on the concept of vector databases, as that was, again, completely new to me. But in the blog post that James has drafted here, the example is an interesting one. He takes the text from the R for Data Science book website, which we definitely have read that a few times if you've been following along in the past few years. He has some handy functions that basically scrape the contents of all that. And then with some additional custom functions that are part of the backend of GPT tools, he can then generate basically preparing it for indexing and then to be able to leverage the OpenAI API to form what are called embeddings associated with the tokens that this text represents. And then from there, he's able to look at some, very basic, but yet pretty powerful dimension reduction to look at these different behind the scenes, these scores or these floating points associated with these vector databases, and look at kind of these interesting clusters of different sets of text within the R for data science source. And then to conclude, you can see all this in action. A nice little video at the end showcasing what's the benefit of having this context using his GPT tools package to start querying some R questions that the R for data science text has some nice, ways of addressing it. This one is going to take me a little bit to digest. This was pretty heady stuff. And I admit, I'm still early in my days of exploring these large language models, especially as I think about use cases in my particular organization. But I think the nugget for me here is that we have opportunities even in the confines of R itself, to bring some much needed additional information that can be used to hopefully give us even more reliable results from these queries that we're going to send to the large language models or ChatGPT so that we can have a more informed set of answers. Now, again, like I said last time we talked about this, you got to have a careful eye when you get these results. Make sure they make sense to you. But I think the potential is great here that opens the door for hopefully some more appropriate, maybe appropriate is the wrong word, but some more helpful context associated with the OpenAI existing models behind the scenes. I think we're all still trying to figure this out, Mike. You can tell I got my head scratching here a little bit, but I really credit James for putting this really concise and very, like I said, very powerful example for us to look at in our GPT tools exploration here.
Yeah, it's got my head spinning as well. But like you said, if you want the sort of TLDR of what is possible, just scroll to the end of this blog post and take the 40 seconds to watch the video that James recorded of the R Studio add-in he created that generates a Shiny app that he created to just write a prompt in a text input box, click a button, and get an answer from ChatGPT. It's absolutely mind-blowing to me. Uh, it comes up with a great response and links to the specific places in the R4DS book that kind of reference the response that it came up with. And this is, I think, there's been a lot of buzz right around it and hype around what ChatGPT can do, and of course it's super powerful. But this sort of use case is for me where the real power of these open source large language models can come into play. Training them on a specific data set to work specifically for a more targeted use case that you have. I think companies could do this on their own internal knowledge that they have and allow employees when they have a question about how a business process works or where in the organization to go to find some piece of information. If they had a tool like this, their own internal, chat GPT, if you will, that could answer some of those questions, I think that would streamline training, answer questions for individuals, probably reduce meetings, right?
Oh,
And
don't tease me like this, Mike.
and just help the business overall. So that's, I guess, the use cases for Chat GPT that I can believe in. Some of the other hype use cases around it, I guess I'm not fully on board yet at this point. But if you are a text mining aficionado, there is a lot of that going on in this blog post, as well as you mentioned, Eric, the topic of vector databases, tokens, embeddings, using UMAP for dimensionality reduction across these different vectors. It's not a field that I have a ton of experience in. I think I need to reread Text Mining with R by Julia Silge and David Robinson. I think they're the folks who wrote that book. I read it once, but I probably need to dive back into it to get some more context around exactly what's going on here. But there's really beautiful custom functions that James has written in this blog post, and he has phenomenal explanations about what he's doing, how it all sort of comes together to create the database and then to utilize, the OpenAI's ChatGPT API to sort of build this living, breathing thing that you can query.
That the idea popped in my head. This is a innovation idea for anybody listening out there. Just imagine now that with a lot of modern packages, we even touched on this a little bit last time around with the R Universe highlight. We're getting some great resources via, say, package down sites or vignettes and the like. Just imagine feeding that as a context and then having that as a source of somebody trying to figure out, hey, can I find a package that maybe queries this, API or this database? Imagine having all that at play. Now, who knows? Maybe the open AI models behind the scenes already have some of this, but boy, just imagine now, flip it a little bit to the focus of this post. Imagine you had a set of internal packages to your organization. They're never going to see the light of day outside the firewall. But if there was a lot of them, and somebody, like you said, somebody new coming into the organization is trying to figure out, okay, how do I get on board with this resource for data processing or this resource to get hooked to this particular system? Yeah, having a little chat widget to answer this instead of emailing like a bunch of people trying to find the answer. Hey, that might work. I'm just saying.
Absolutely, absolutely, and yeah, forget about what I said before that I haven't fully wrapped my head around this. If you're looking for some help in standing this up within your own organization, Catchbrook Analytics can absolutely do this for you.
Now that is a way to circle it back. Well done, my
Y-
friend.
yeah,
Well done.
quick pitch. Yes.
You know what? It's my turn to pitch a little bit for this last highlight because I admit the context of this actually stemmed from a really entertaining panel discussion that I was able to lead at the recent Shiny conference, which hopefully the videos will be up soon. But the subject of our last highlight here was actually one of the innovations or best use cases that Nicola Rennie, who is a terrific data scientist over at Jumping Rivers, brought to our attention as we were talking about what are some of the areas that we think Shiny application developers should definitely take notice of as they produce more, production ready apps. And the general concept here is accessibility. This is not something we haven't touched on before, but what Nicola does a great job here from the Jumping Rivers blog is tell you three very quick and I would say, easy is always a strong word, but I think with the explanations here, you can get started with adding accessibility to your visualizations quite quickly with the following methods. So, first, again, old timer Eric here learned something new in this post a couple of ways, but the first is one of our favorite R packages for visualization, ggplot2. Apparently now, I'm not sure when this came into fruition, but in the labs function, which often people use for labeling, there is an alt parameter where you can put in the alt text for that ggplot. Just straightforward text string, and you've got it right there and there. So there's no excuse not to put alt text in your ggplots now. That is just a simple function parameter away. And then also, we talk a lot in previous episodes about reproducible reporting with R Markdown and Quarto. Well, in each of them, you have in a code chunk the fig.alt option, where then once again, you can feed in some nice text that describes your plot. And then Nicola does some great context here. Again, I'm using that word probably too much in this in this episode, but there are ways that you can take advantage of, you might say, dynamic nature of things, where maybe instead of just writing that text all throughout these chunks one by one, maybe you have a variable that holds your text, and then you can reference that as your fig.alt parameter value in these chunks. So maybe you have a data driven way of creating the alt text. You can definitely take advantage of that with skills that you already know with using R. And then comes, full circle again. We're going to talk about Shiny because why not? But in Nicola's post wrap up here, she mentions how In Shiny, often we serve our plots in a reactive way with the render plot function. Well, on top of putting in the expression of the plot itself, you now have an alt argument in render plot, which not only can take a simple string for your alt text, you can take a reactive object for your alt text, which means in the example that she shows here, maybe you're switching variables, maybe you're doing a filtering or something like that. You could dynamically in the app update the alt text so that then when the reactivity finishes and you show the rendered plot with the updated data, the alt text is going to be appropriate for that particular selection. So instead of only running that alt text once up front, now it can be regenerated at the whim via how you define reactivity. Oh my goodness, I'm so glad I found that out because I'm going to use that technique from this point forward in my Shiny apps because that was a huge win for my knowledge of what I can do to bring accessibility. So these are just a few ways you can do it. And then also in Nicola's post, she links to a terrific presentation by Liz Hare that was given at a recent Our Ladies NYC meetup about how you can bring alt text very easily in a lot of your R coding adventures. So I have a link to that in the supplements as well.
Yes, this was a phenomenal, quick, easily digestible post with just some great points about accessibility, and we really have no excuse at this point not to add alt text to any visuals that we create in our data science output. And I had not realized that there was this super convenient alt argument in render plot that we have in Shiny now. And the ability to add dynamic alt text is amazing. I really think they just keep making it so easy for us, and I've been living in Quarto for the past 2 weeks, as we spoke about pre show, writing two 10-page responses to a couple of RFPs that are looking for a data analysis report. And something that I'm going to reference in our response is that we always include alt text for accessibility in all of our visuals. And hopefully that helps us stand out from the crowd. So thank you to Quarto and all of these different tools out there that make it so easy for us to do that. And also a quick shout out to the ability to include child documents in Quarto. I love Quarto. I know I'm going off on a Quarto tangent, but yes, great blog post.
Yeah, but again, the tooling available now. Um, if you asked me this about 5 or 6 years ago, I would have said, "Hey, I want to do it, but I don't know where to begin." Now we have lots of places to make this happen. And yes, the context here, I use that word too much. The domain here was visualization, but there are many other ways that accessibility is just as important. And I think as we build packages and applications, we definitely need to have this up front, right away as we begin development, because just like how maybe it's not the perfect analogy, but bolting on things like automated testing, like after you've built a whole bunch of your package or app infrastructure, always seems more daunting than if you just get it started up front. And yes, we're both nodding our heads because we've been there. We know the drill here. And one of these days, we're going to listen to ourselves about this, aren't we?
Yes. Yes. Thanks for calling me out that I was nodding my head very much in agreement, that yes, I need to start doing these things up front a little bit more.
Well, quick little side plug here before we get to our additional finds. But Mike and I are putting our heads together for these tips and techniques in the context of Shiny because him and I are leading a workshop at PositConf about production Shiny applications, tools, and techniques. So definitely stay tuned for that. We got a lot in store there.
Yes, we are so excited, and we will keep you posted as we begin to put more and more together in terms of what that workshop is going to look like, and hopefully, maybe some folks out there listening today will be joining us in Chicago for it.
Well, what else is fantastic to read and level up your now our knowledge of, and that is the rest of this issue of our weekly, of course. And we got a couple of minutes here to talk about some additional finds. And you know me, I love my media content. So my additional find here is something that would make my head scratch quite a bit in my early days. Is that if you ever run a function and you look at its documentation and then you see in the help page the three dots. What in the heck are the three dots? Well, that is the subject of Josiah Perry's recent video of demystifying the concept behind the three dots. There's many ways to describe it, but it is very effective at teaching you what seems like such a magical thing, you can take advantage right now in your function and package development to make it even easier for your users to feed in additional customizations to your functions that you can leverage for additional processing. So, Josiah did a terrific job of explaining this, and I have this bookmarked for sharing with other users at my company as they look at my functions and they ask me, what is the three dots? Please help. Well, we got some help along the way. So thank you, Josiah, for making that video. I think it's a great resource.
That's a great find, Eric. And I don't know if you know this is coming, but there's another great find on Shiny use cases within pharma from the Posit blog with our very own Eric Nance, and a discussion on how Shiny can be used within clinical trials for exploratory data analysis, collaboration, even automation, and using it as a front end to HPC environments, which I believe you do maybe just a little bit of in your in your day job. So definitely check out these short little nice clips if you are someone who's in the life sciences or clinical trials space. You are going to get a ton out of this blog post. So great job by Eric and Curtis on the Posit team to put this content together for us. It was awesome.
Oh, thank you, sir. And it was, this has been in the works for a while. So thanks to Curtis for not only making this super easy for me to get started, but his patience with me. We've had some stops and starts, but he did a terrific job of narrating the story here. And honestly, all of this was feedback or in knowledge that I've learned probably it's the hard way. That's my early days of Shiny, figuring out the best uses of it, getting a better handle on the potential of it. So what you heard in those series of clips is from literally my 13 years of using Shiny, however long it's been. It's every year is something new. So that was just a snapshot of it. And the goal of it is to inspire others because we are seeing this industry and life sciences really starting to embrace and leverage the power of open source in a lot of our innovations. And we're just getting started. We got a long ways to go, but I think Shiny's a pivotal part in that picture.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And of course, we love hearing from you. If you want to contribute to the R Weekly project itself, all you need to do is send us a pull request for a great resource, package, blog post, video, any content you think can benefit the R community. Please send us a pull request to our draft that's currently in the works. It's all markdown all the time. So it's very easy to get started with that. And if you got feedback for your trusted co hosts here, you can feel free to send us, even with the new modern podcast apps you could download via, say, Podverse or Fountain. You can send us a little boost in that podcast player itself to give us a little shout out. And of course, we also have a contact page that's linked directly in the show notes as well. And you can find us on the social media interwebs, if you will. I am still sporadically on Twitter with at the Rcast, and you can find me on Mastodon as well with at our podcast at podcastindex.social. Mike, where can they find you?
Yep, same story here. Twitter at Mike underscore Ketchbrook, KETCHBROOK, and Mastodon at Mike underscore Thomas at fostodon.org.
Awesome stuff. And of course, we enjoy hearing from you. And yeah, knock on wood, there won't be any catastrophes with illnesses next week. But yeah, we'll be looking forward to another great issue and giving you our takes on the latest innovations from the art community. And hopefully, you enjoy listening to this. And again, I invite you to check out the back catalog as well, because there's always a lot of interesting threads that we often touch on from time to time, all in this space of you name it, things like Shiny, things like uses of machine learning. We have all sorts of interesting content here. So that'll do it for this episode of our weekly highlights. And we'll be back with another episode next week.